Harley Davidson just got destroyed, their CEO was half lunatic, and dragged the whole company straight into collapse. And guess what? They kicked him out, only to bring in another guy who doesn't even know bikes. You can't imagine how ugly Harley's future is about to get. Harley Davidson in the past 4 years, under Jochen Zeitz, who became CEO in 2020, the company managed to face its sharpest collapse in history. And you'd think, okay, Harley sees the damage, they'll clean house, and move on. But nope. They announced Zeitz will officially step down on October 1st, 2025, but then in the same breath, they said he's sticking around as an advisor until February 2026. Like, really? This is the guy who drove the ship straight into an iceberg, and the board thought, hey, let's let him sit in the passenger seat and give directions. Riders aren't buying it. They see it as nothing short of betrayal. Because if you want a signal change, you don't let the guy who crashed the company whisper in board meetings for another 4 months. The Harley community isn't stupid. Their outrage has been loud. You don't let the guy who wrecked the bike take it for one more spin. And the anger isn't just emotional. The numbers tell the real story. Global sales didn't just dip, they collapsed by over 20% between 2022 and 2024. Over 20% gone in just 2 years. That's not a slowdown. That's the kind of free fall that makes investors choke on their morning coffee. And it only got worse. By 2024, Harley Davidson's motorcycle revenue didn't just stumble, it nosedived 60% year over year. 60%. That's not a crack in the pavement, that's the road disappearing underneath you. It was the steepest collapse Harley had ever reported in its history, and it happened under Zeitz's watch. If you zoom in on the last quarter of 2024, the disaster looks even uglier. Harley sold 53% fewer motorcycles compared to the same quarter in 2023. Imagine being a dealership manager watching more than half your showroom just sit there collecting dust. Bikes that used to fly out the door were basically being used as display furniture. And when you look at total shipments for 2024, the picture doesn't improve. Harley shipped 148,862 motorcycles worldwide. Sounds like a lot until you compare it to 2023, where that number was 17% higher. So, yeah, not exactly something to brag about. Financially, it was a bloodbath. In the fourth quarter of 2024, Harley's revenue dropped to $420 million, down 47% from the year before. Almost half their revenue gone in a single year. And to make it sting even more, they posted a $214 million operating loss that same quarter. That's not a hiccup, that's the company bleeding out. By the end of the full year, Harley's operating income collapsed to $417 million. And while that might sound like money to some people, it was nearly half of what they pulled in during 2023. That's like going from cruising on the open highway to pushing your bike because the engine's blown. And you know the stock market doesn't like this kind of circus. In 2023, Harley's stock was riding high at about $50 a share. By 2025, it was barely hanging on around $20. That's a 51% collapse. Investors literally watched half their money vanish. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, there was a single month where the stock dropped 22%. That's the kind of chart that looks less like a business and more like a ski slope. So, how did we get here? Easy. The leadership had no idea what riders actually wanted. And it starts with Jochen Zeitz himself. This guy didn't come from the motorcycle world. He came from Puma. Yes, sneakers. The man knew more about laces than engines, and Harley thought that was the guy to steer the company's future. Riders saw that as a red flag the moment he was hired. Because let's be real, you don't take someone who sells running shoes and hand them the keys to one of the most iconic motorcycle companies in history. But Harley did, and once he was in, he rolled out these so-called visionary plans called Rewire and Hardwire. Sounds fancy, like the kind of buzzwords consultants throw around in PowerPoint presentations. But what did those plans actually mean? Simple. Cancel bikes that people loved and force a new direction nobody asked for. Beloved entry models like the Sportster 883, the Sportster 1200, and the Road King Electra Glide Standard were killed off. These weren't random models. They were the bikes that thousands of new riders used as their entry point into the Harley family. Killing them off was like McDonald's deciding to drop the Big Mac because they wanted to look more sophisticated. It was corporate insanity. And when the lineup shrank, the prices went up. Under Zeitz, the cheapest Harley crossed the $12,000 mark. 12 grand just to get your foot in the door. For younger enthusiasts or people just starting out, that slammed the door shut. The brand that was once about welcoming new riders into the lifestyle basically told them, sorry, unless you've got hedge fund money, you're not invited. And it's not like these bikes were offering anything revolutionary in return. They were just more expensive versions of what people used to buy at half the cost. Dealers weren't happy either. People like Matt Laidlaw and Bubba Boswell, who actually live and breathe Harley every single day, went public with their criticism. They blasted the leadership on YouTube, in podcasts, in interviews, anywhere someone would listen. And they weren't whispering politely. They said it straight. Harley was ignoring its riders and chasing image over substance. Because when you run a motorcycle company, the only people you should be listening to are the ones actually riding your bikes. But under Zeitz, those voices were sidelined. And the customers? They weren't quiet about their disgust either. Riders mocked the so-called innovations like tech-heavy dashboards that looked more like a Tesla than a Harley. Nobody buys a Harley to scroll through menus like they're in a luxury sedan. And don't even get me started on the synthetic engine sounds. Riders openly joked about it. Paying Harley money to sound like a glorified blender isn't just dumb, it's insulting. People buy Harleys for the rumble that rattles your chest, not a fake digital buzz coming from a speaker. So here's where we're at. Harley Davidson, the company that used to stand for freedom, rebellion, and pure American grit, found itself being run like a Silicon Valley startup, except without any of the success. Under Zeitz, sales collapsed, revenue tanked, stock prices fell off a cliff. Beloved models were axed, prices skyrocketed, and the community that built the brand was mocked with fake noises and iPad dashboards. And instead of cutting ties completely, the board decided to keep Zeitz hanging around until 2026, just to rub salt in the wound. Riders aren't blind. They see exactly what's going on. And they're furious that the Harley they loved has been traded for corporate nonsense by a guy who used to sell sneakers. Let's talk about the biggest comedy act Harley ever staged, the Livewire. This thing was supposed to be Harley's electric revolution. Back in 2019, they rolled it out with a jaw-dropping sticker price of $29,799. 30 grand for silence. You can't make this up. Harley built its entire brand on loud pipes, chest-rattling engines, and that iconic roar that made neighbors hate you at 6 a.m. And now, suddenly, they thought riders would drop nearly 30 grand for a bike that sounded like a glorified blender. It was Harley's love letter to an audience that didn't even exist. So, how did that go? Well, in the first full year, they sold fewer than 1,000 units. Not a typo. Not even 4 digits. Dealers started jokingly calling them dust collectors because that's literally what they were doing on the showroom floor, collecting dust while people walked past them to look at real bikes. Imagine trying to hype a revolution and ending up with warehouses full of unsold inventory. That's not innovation. That's a clearance sale waiting to happen. In a desperate attempt to move product, Harley cut the price by more than $7,000. That's not a discount. That's panic. But even after slashing the price, demand stayed dead. Riders didn't care if you knocked off 7 grand or 10 grand, because at the end of the day, it was still a $30,000 electric Harley without the soul that made Harley, Harley. And let's not forget the cost of this disaster. Harley burned through over $100 million on research, development, and marketing just for Livewire. $100 million thrown into a project that turned into the industry's biggest punchline, And just when you thought they'd quietly bury this embarrassment, they doubled down. In 2024, revenue for the Livewire dropped another 32%. Yes, while the whole company was already sinking, this electric experiment became an anchor pulling them even deeper underwater. What was Harley's genius solution? Spin Livewire into a separate company, as if rebranding the disaster was somehow going to make writers forget. Newsflash, it didn't work. Nobody was fooled, nobody cared, and dealers still couldn't move these bikes. Riders kept mocking the whole thing as a joke. Pay 30 grand for silence instead of the rumble that made the brand famous? Yeah, that wasn't happening. The Livewire wasn't a revolution. It was a $100 million mistake. And if you think the Livewire fiasco was bad, wait until you see how Harley managed to betray its own culture. The company that built its reputation on Made in America decided to outsource manufacturing to factories in Thailand. Riders instantly saw that as a betrayal. They didn't pay a premium price for imports. If you wanted a cheap bike from overseas, you'd buy a Honda. Harley was supposed to be different, supposed to mean something. Outsourcing torched the trust that kept riders loyal. But Harley wasn't done shooting itself in the foot. Instead of focusing on grit, chrome, and the culture that built their empire, they shifted their focus to DEI branding campaigns. Riders weren't impressed. Even Elon Musk chimed in on X and mocked Harley's woke push, saying it didn't sound super compatible with their customers. And let's be honest, if Elon Musk is clowning on you, you've already lost the plot. Meanwhile, riders were looking for simpler bikes. Models like the Road King Police Edition were becoming underground favorites because they were cheaper, stripped down, and actually felt like Harley. But did Harley bring those to the civilian market? Of course not. They killed them off, ignoring the clear demand that was staring them in the face. It was like the board had no clue what people actually wanted. And the cherry on top? CEO compensation. Jochen Seitz was pulling in $12 million a year. $12 million while the company was collapsing. And in 2023, they even handed him a $3 million bonus. A bonus while sales were tanking, dealerships were suffocating, and riders were struggling with entry prices over $12,000. Imagine being a loyal Harley rider, watching your dream bike slip out of reach, and then hearing the guy responsible for this mess is cashing bonus checks bigger than your dealer's annual revenue. That's corporate America at its dumbest. And that's just the start, so hit that subscribe button because the Harley meltdown is only getting crazier from here.